unless we, the people of India, demand reforms and we don't aspire to have that $10 trillion economy, we are not becoming a $10 trillion economy. If our thinking is we want reveries, then we will get reveries. It's not like we got up one morning and we just cut the taxes. I mean, we were aware that the taxes earlier were high, and so we have only reduced them over time when we felt that we could afford it. You need a middle class that is feeling confident, that wants to go out there and take risks.
The number of patents granted has risen from 6,000 in 2015 to more than 100,000 last year. That's huge.
A decade ago, we were doing just 6,000 patents a year. There were process problems, so we cleaned up the processes, but we simply didn't have enough people there. We had a few, paltry few, 300-400 people in the patent office. They are competing against 8,500 people in the American patent office, 13,500 people in the Chinese patent office. Just this last few months, we have put in 500 more people into this space. So dramatically expanding the capacity.
So are you telling me that India already has its own Doge, has been in place?
We have
Elon Musk and Donald
Trump. In the sense of an actual department, but we do have a Doge-like effort, which has been going on for quite some time. We've got to continuously re-look at our processes, look at the efficiency of it. Maybe we did a great reform, it improved dramatically, but then times change and the guys we are competing with have moved on. We can't say, oh no, they're the very good. No, now the game is a different one. What used to take, we went from 7 days to 1 day, great, but now every country in the world is doing it in 3 hours. Well, we have to do it in 3 hours or less.
Hi, you're watching The Times of India. I'm Aditi Prasad, and with me today is Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal. He's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's economic advisor, and I'm very grateful that you're speaking to us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Now, over the next couple of minutes, half an hour, we're going to talk to you about India's $10 trillion trajectory, how we are getting there, how we are reaching there. But I want to start with the budget because that's what's on everybody's mind right now, especially many people talking about the budget as a magic budget, as Modi's bullet budget, largely because of the huge tax relief to the middle classes. Now, that being said, do you also have a terminology for the budget, an adjective that you would want to use to define this budget?
No, I'll leave that to you. We have been moving in a particular pattern for a while. So systematically, our idea is to create an India that is aspirational, an economy that is based on innovation, on risk-taking. And so, we want to encourage a middle class that can go out there, take risks, and build an economy based on innovation. That requires a certain dynamism and sort of attitude, so to speak, in our middle class. Eventually, every country that has gone through this high growth has eventually been driven by this middle class energy. So we want that energy to be there in our middle class. And to the extent we could afford it, we provided that.
I'll talk about the affordability of it in a bit, but just quickly, obviously, urban consumption, domestic consumption was a key challenge facing the economy. This budget puts more money, the tax cuts especially put more money into the pockets of the average middle class, the consumer. Do you believe that it's going to result in an increase in domestic consumption, the urban consumption, or is it all going to go into saving? Because we Indians are very big on saving all the time.
No, I don't think that's the correct way to think about it. See, there are two parts to this. One is the quarterly, month-by-month management of demand that you have to do. As is well known, there has been some slowdown in the economy. And so, to balance that out, some pumping up of demand is happening. There was, for example, capital spending by the government last year for some months was running behind schedule in a sense. And so, it's now being ramped up. Similarly, some of these tax cuts will presumably go into consumption and bring back some energy into that space as well. So from a very narrow perspective, if you're thinking about it, yes, I mean, putting money into the system adds to the demand of the system. And now we will see what the RBI's Monetary Policy Committee also does on the monetary side. So we will get some sense of the demand sort of reflation. This is a continuous adjustment of what any government in the world does. We do it too. And the idea is to then keep the economy running at the fastest pace that we can, given the global scenario and given inflationary pressure. So that is the very narrow view of this thing.
Okay.
There is a wider thing that we are trying to do, which I think is important to understand. We believe that the longer term trajectory of the Indian economy to that $10 trillion or beyond, whatever number you want, is that it has to come from an internal energy of innovation, risk taking, and so on. And that will only come from essentially a new entrepreneurial class, new sort of innovators, scientists, writers, basically risk takers of all kinds that will emerge. And typically, societies generated comes from every strata of society, but the middle class tends to play a very disproportionate role in every society in providing this energy. So if you are thinking in a longer term perspective, you need a middle class that is feeling confident, that wants to go out there and take risks. So that is a very important part of what we are doing. So if you take, making sure that somebody up to 12 lakhs, that's 1 lakh per month, basically, a salary, is basically has income to then not just spend money and buy ice creams or television, etc., but also to invest into a startup, or to invest into some idea, writing a book, whatever. The point is to create an energy in that segment of society that has a disproportionate role in creating economic dynamism in any society.
Right. That sounds great. And if that happens, obviously, some of it will happen. Definitely, there'll be dynamism in the economy and will, of course, reap the results. But in a year where the global headwinds are high, there's Donald Trump snapping at our heels in terms of talking about raising tariffs. How much, is it a risk to be losing that 1 lakh crore from these additional tax revenues?
No, so we have been very careful. Yeah. You see, it's not like we got up one morning and we just cut the taxes. I mean, we were aware that the taxes earlier were high. And so we have only reduced them over time when we felt that we could afford it. However, this whole issue of middle class dynamism was there 10 years ago also.
Correct.
Why didn't we cut it then? Because we couldn't afford it. Now our economy has gone to a stage where we are, our GST system has stabilized to a significant extent. Our banks have got cleaned up, so we don't spend a huge amount of money recapitalizing them.
Right.
All those kinds of burdens that we had, the COVID burden, so, these are major expenditures we were having to do. And so we kept kicking this can down the road. But we realized that at some point in time, the middle class has to be given that sort of space to go out there and, create that dynamism I was talking about. And by the way, this is just one peg. We also have the peg of deregulation. We have the peg of infrastructure. These are all parts of the wider
Right. In
picture.
fact, it's good that you mentioned deregulation. Viewers, I have the Economist here in front of me, and Mr. Sanyal is quoted in the Economist, and I'm just going to read, a part of what they've written about India. In 2021, it took 499 days on an average, involved in placing an advertisement in newspapers. By last year, it took only 90.
This is for voluntary closure of companies.
For voluntary closure of companies. That's the time it took. Applying for a patent used to be an ordeal, owing to a shortage of qualified staff to review the claims. Now, hundreds have been hired, and the number of patents granted has risen from 6,000 in 2015 to more than 100,000 last year. That's huge. There are only Indians going and applying for patents.
Absolutely.
And it goes down to what you're talking about, the process reforms that you just spoke about. Tell us what the process reforms have been initiated over the last several years, which really the rest of us know nothing about.
Well, I tend to write about them in newspapers. Sadly, maybe they don't get the attention they do. But
Right.
we have opened up large numbers of the economy in the last 7-8 years. Deregulating the drone sector, deregulating the space sector, deregulating the geospatial sector. All of this, by the way, was done during COVID.
Right.
And look at, we now have a thriving sector, some of these things. Similarly, we have shut down all kinds of units which were, every government has old departments which have outlived their usefulness. So we have shut lots of them down. Tariff Commission, All India Handloom Board, Children's Film Society, where we merged with another entity. So there's a huge amount of cleaning up of government institutions, government regulations that we are doing. So since you mentioned about the patents, let me tell you, we have moved so fast that in fact the private sector is unable to keep up with us. So let me show you the problem. So you just mentioned, just a decade ago, we were doing just 6,000 patents a year.
Right.
Now we want to be Vishwaguru, global, knowledge economy. 6,000 patents. The US at that time was doing over 3 lakh patents a year. At that time, China was doing 4 lakh patents a year. Now it does even more. How are you going to compete? So we looked into the system. And one of them, there were process problems, so we cleaned up the processes, but we simply didn't have enough people there. We had a few, paltry few, 300-400 people in the patent office. They are competing against 8,500 people in the American patent office, 13,500 people in the Chinese patent office. Now just imagine a cricket match where the other guy is 13 and a half players and you have half a player. Now you're going to lose. So we began to, for a person who is usually, much into cleaning up bureaucracy, there are parts of the bureaucracy you need to add to. So here I made a big case that, look, we need to add more people here. And we did. We have now been hiring lots of people into this space. Just this last few months, we have put in 500 more people into this space. So dramatically expanding the capacity.
In the areas where it needs to be expanded.
Yes. So in patents, for example, we are now hiring another 200 people into trademarks, for example. It takes time to bring them on, train them, etc. So deployment takes time, but still at some point you have to do it. Now, as a result of this, in the last financial year that ended March of 24, we did granted patents worth, we did 103,000 patents, or 1,03,000 patents.
Wow.
Okay. That is more than the number of applications we received. We received only 92,000 applications. So this is all the backlog that we were cleaning up.
Okay.
Okay, now how long can you run a backlog? Because I'm adding even more capacity. True. So now our problem is our capacity is growing, but the R&D that needs to be done to create the kinds of patents. So if I want to do 1 lakh patents a year, it's a rough rule of thumb. I need to get at least 2 lakhs, 3 lakhs, something like that applicants. I can't. Right. So once I've used up the backlog, I will need those kinds of applicants. But my applicants are not even reaching 1 lakh. So my real problem now is people, in the end, most patents in the world come from the private sector, not from government labs. They come from private labs, private innovation. We need to create a culture of R&D in our corporate sector that can keep up, in fact, with the capacities that we are creating in the government.
Right.
Through these processes of deregulation and opening up.
And that is being done to a large extent. The budget has also addressed that. Having said that, there are still a lot of bottlenecks, and I'm sure you know all about them. Talk to us about the bottlenecks that you still face, because everywhere you go, you hear about MSMEs, for instance, running into capital outlay problems, into compliance issues.
So there is no doubt that there is a jungle of compliance problems, not just for companies or MSMEs or whatever, but even for daily life. And this is something I've written about. Take, for example, EPFO. If you are an EPFO subscriber, taking out your money is a real pain. I don't know if any of you here have attempted to do it. Know that it eventually is, the the website doesn't work, you put it in, it gets refused, and so on. So each one of these things has to be identified. Internal battles have to be fun in every single case. But then the system gets simplified, the information technology to back it is done. So again, EPFO is an area that right now the labor minister is looking personally into that whole issue. And one area which we did work on is shipbuilding, which is there in the budget this time. So let me give you, so this is a problem we are in the process of trying to solve. But let me give you a problem that in the budget we announced some solution to. I mean, we haven't yet got the impact of it. The patents one we already have the impact, but here is something we hope to have the impact of. India has only 487 ships that are capable of transoceanic cargo movements.
Right.
Just 487. Most of them are very small.
Yeah, we are some 0.00 something percentage of the global shipping.
Yeah, so basically 90+% of all our shipping is carried by foreign ships. Now, this is a huge cost, almost $100 billion a year in imports in terms of shipping services that we are and shipping related services. So when every time a good comes in or we export something, we're paying some shipping guy. That is, after oil, I think the second biggest import is this. Okay. Now, this is a tragedy because, in fact, India is one of the few countries in the world that can actually build ships of scale and size. I mean, how many countries in the world can build nuclear submarines? How many countries can build aircraft carriers? And yet we are not building oil tankers. And this is a huge, I mean, forget the economic cost of it, the $100 billion we are paying, but it's a geostrategic risk.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because you see, from a geostrategic standpoint, India is an island nation.
Correct.
Okay.
Surrounded by what?
Yeah, no, our northern reaches are not our trading. So we do trade with China, but not with the parts that are adjacent to us. And of course, we don't trade with our western neighbor at all. So therefore, from an economic perspective, we are an island nation. We need to have, if we do not have our own ships, it just requires 3-4 of the biggest shipping lines in the world to say that we don't like India. And, within a few weeks, we will be on our knees.
Right.
We need our own ships. We need to own them. We need to flag them. And very importantly, we need to build them. So India builds less than some ridiculously small number, something percent of the world's ships. China builds 45% of the world's ships.
And Japan.
And Japan builds, between Japan and Korea, they build another 40% of the world's ships.
I think 3 of them together have some.
95% of the world's ships.
Yeah.
So now we are building less than, we are building some 0.1% of the world's ships. And in that environment, it's an economic loss, it's a geostrategic risk. I have been arguing for a long time, as have others, and not just me, and the Prime Minister himself has been arguing, this is a sector that we have to go for.
But why haven't we gone for it till now? And I'm not just talking about the last 10 years.
I don't know.
We understand that it is a geostrategic, there's a huge geostrategic reason to have this industry and a flourishing one at that. But we have a negligible operator in that
ironically,
case.
we have a history, we have one of the oldest histories in the world of shipbuilding.
Exactly.
Going back to the Bronze Age.
Right.
Even in the time of the British used to construct a lot of their ships in India. Even after independence, we still had some shipyards.
Right.
But over time, we kind of allowed it to fritter away.
Okay.
And didn't pay attention to it. But now, as you can see, in the last few years, we have been putting a lot of attention to it. There are right now 4 maritime-related bills in Parliament. The very major change that was made announced in the budget was giving shipping infrastructure status, which means that, one very simple thing. If ships don't have infrastructure status, financial institutions cannot give them long-term loans. Now, a ship lasts 30 years. The game of shipping, running the ship actually is not a very complicated thing. It's the financing that is the issue. If you can give it long finances, you see, shipping returns are very spiky. Some years you make money, some years you lose money. But over a long period of time, you make a lot of money. And the way you survive this long period of time, or that 30 years, is you have financing for that long period and also insurance, not just loans. Sure. Now, you can only get that in our financial system if you have infrastructure status. Now, that was excluded from our infrastructure status. So, therefore, financial institutions couldn't finance ships. You could finance a shipbuilding yard, but not the ship. So what's the point of having the shipbuilding yard if nobody has the financing for the product that the shipbuilding yard builds?
Yes.
So that is why, Prime Minister Modi went on after the budget. He explained this particular. He took specific time off to explain this reform, because with infrastructure status, and there are a few other reforms we need to do. We have to look at the Sarfesi Act and other things as well. But basically, once we have got this, put in the effort of creating new shipbuilding yards. The old ones also need upgradation. And then this is a huge industry. I mean, quite apart from everything else, this is an industry which creates massive number of jobs. I mean, what is a ship hull? It's literally tens of thousands of hours of welding. Right? And then, other than the engine, basically we can build everything else today. And that engine is, something we still have to import, and hopefully some Indian group will create an Indian engine as well. But other than the engine, the entire shell, everything else of a commercial ocean-going ship can now be constructed entirely Atmanirbhar.
Wow. So that sounds like a great step forward, especially in a day and age where, the global supply chains are such a big issue, and everyone keeps talking about how China owns most of the global supply chains or has a sort of big stake there, and where India lags. So that having been addressed, but I just want to circle back to something else you said a while ago about process reforms, and that's the thought had struck me at that time, but we moved on to shipbuilding. So what you're basically saying when you're saying that all these reforms, the process reforms, bits and pieces that are taking place over the last several years. So are you telling me that India already has its own Doge, has been in place?
We have
Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
Doge in the sense of an actual department, but we do have a Doge-like effort which has been going on for quite some time. So first of all, let me explain what it is that process reforms are, so that you understand what they are. So when you normally hear about reforms, you basically are told about structural reforms.
Yeah, big ticket reforms.
Big ticket reforms.
Agriculture, labor, this.
Yeah. So what are the big reforms we have? The original 1991 reforms. Why are they structural reforms? They change the structure of our economy.
Right.
The GST is a structural reform. It changed the structure of the indirect taxes of this country. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, it changed the structure of creative destruction in the financial system. These are structural reforms. Now, they are important, but a lot of the reforms that we actually need to do, even to make these structural reforms sometimes work better, is all these small nuts and bolts, step-by-step reforms. Now, these are not ones anybody bothers except in the 5th page of Economic Times or Times of India. Times of India probably doesn't even cover it. Economic Times pages, maybe the business pages, 4 lines will be there. But they are very important. This is about the small, rule number 77, subsection D, some 3 words have to be changed. Some obscure department gone defunct has to be closed. Some place you have to add a little bit of government, some you have to reduce a little bit of government. So all the changes, if you notice the changes I talked about so far, are actually process reforms. Shipping is being given infrastructure status. This is actually a one-line reform, but massive
implications. Yeah.
Right. Similarly, voluntary closure of companies in India, massively complicated thing to do till recently. It used to take years to shut down a company. Everybody agrees a company has to be shut down. And this is not companies I'm talking about that are gone insolvent. See, 80-90% of companies that are shut down every year are not companies that are shut down because
they ran out of money.
Something. It's just some old man, his son doesn't want to do that particular thing. He's shutting it down. Something to that effect. Now, if you wanted to shut down a company like this, nobody's objecting to it. And yet, it would take years to do this. So again, when I was in finance ministry, I and my team, we looked into this and we made a series of presentations to the honorable finance minister. And we came to the conclusion there were a few odd things about the whole thing. First of all, you had to get a whole bunch of NOCs. For reasons unknown, the practice was to do it in sequence. Now, why do you need to do this in sequence? You can get all the NOCs in parallel. Secondly, it used to take years for the registrar of companies to put out an advertisement for your company to be shut down, which is the point you had read earlier. Now, why would it take so long? So all that has happened is that there is now a website called CPACE. You put in your application. The system simultaneously asks different departments, do you have an objection? In 21 days or whatever the exact day is, if they have not replied, then it is deemed as a as an NOC. Then the list goes directly to the registrar of companies. If they have an objection, they have to raise an objection. But if not, it automatically gets into the thing. So as a result of which, what used to take 500 days now takes 90 days to shut down a company, which is the fastest in the world, by the way.
Really?
Yes. And this has happened because of not some great reform of, structural change in something. This is just small changes and tweaks. So similarly, there are hundreds of such small changes and tweaks you could do. The building codes of this country. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had to suffer through making changes in your house. You will find absurd rules about how your, how many staircases you should be, how big your prayer room should be. How do you care? Well, I want a big prayer room. You want a small prayer room. That's my problem in life. How big the letter box in your condominium letterbox room should be. I mean, why? But they are there in our regulations for completely mysterious reasons. Similarly, we are in Delhi. You have all these, they have a list of national monuments. Now, these national monuments, most of them are not even worthy of national monuments. We just happen to have British monuments that we just took over. So we took it over. We call them national monuments. They are not national monuments in any way or form. But all the rules and regulations that apply to the Brihadeshwara temple and Taj Mahal also apply to them. For 300 meters radius, you cannot do X, Y, Z changes, etc. So large parts of Delhi, you have a bizarre situation. You are living next to something that's called a national monument, which is some colonial official's grave or something completely irrelevant.
Right.
But you have to go every time to ASI, you want to make some small change, you have to go, and all kinds of harassment, delay, all kinds of things happen as a result.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example of something we have changed. Again, another change. So there was a British brigadier general who, in 1858, during the sacking of Delhi after the Great Revolt in 1858, he carried out several massacres. Now, his statue was set up in front by the British of the Kashmiri Gate.
Okay.
It became a national monument. After independence, we inherited it. It continued to be in the list of national monuments. All the 300-meter yard thing were applied to, and Kashmiri Gate, as you can imagine, hugely crowded place. So many houses, everybody has to go to ASI to get something. Even worse, his grave, which is called John Nicholson, was the person's name. John Nicholson's grave is also a national monument.
Oh my God.
That's also in Kashmiri Gate. So another 300-meter yard area, which is national, you cannot do anything. Now, the story is even more bizarre. Somewhere in the 1960s, the village from which John Nicholson came from, in somewhere in Northern Ireland, asked for a statue. So we packed it and sent it off to Northern Ireland. But we did not delist it from our list of national monuments. So the empty space
is a national
monument.
Wow.
Okay. And those 300-yard thing continued to apply till July of 2024.
Wow.
So this is also your process reform.
Right. I mean, I'm sure. So there must be just so much to do.
Yes.
Because
So
there are
for example,
reams and reams.
There are dozens of national monuments. We don't even know where they are. Okay. Since the 1970s, several parliamentary questions have been asked about where are these national monuments that are in the list. But does the ASI know where they are? ASI does not also know where they are. But they're in the national list.
But that's just one vertical, Sanjeev. I mean, if one vertical. Yeah.
There are MSME rules. There are rules for KYC. I won't even get into the Income Tax Act that is now being cleaned up as you see. The finance minister.
The bill is going to come this week,
Yeah.
so let's see
So
what
we'll
it
see, hopefully you will get to see the work
Yes.
that has gone into.
But you spoke about MSMEs, so I just want to go there for 1 minute and talk about, because it's a sector which generates huge employment, very powerful sector, but plagued by again those problems that you're talking about. All over regulation,
all kinds of inspector
lack of capital, lack of capital, compliance
It's
issues.
almost as if 1991 did not happen for them.
Exactly. So you just have to go there and, there are
The harassment, the bribe taking, the delays,
and it all stems perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, from the whole attitude of our revenue, how our revenue thing is.
the revenue is only the
Emphasis is on collecting revenue.
revenue is only one small part of it. In fact, that has at least is some sort of a functional system.
Okay.
You should look at some of the other kinds of regulations depending on the sector that they have.
So
to
how
deal
do
with.
we unshackle the MSMEs? Because that's where the real unshackling is needed, isn't it?
Absolutely. So this is where you have to literally do the painful thing of going one regulation at a time and cleaning it up. And I'll give you another. I've been illustrating every one of them so that you know that I know what I'm talking about. I'll give you another illustration, something that MSMEs definitely benefit from. Simple process reform required no money from the government except one notification. Okay? Labeling laws. Okay? Very simple thing. Every food product or whatever consumer good you have has labels on it.
Right.
Now, the way labels are printed, you do large batches of labels. So there's a labeling, whoever is a label manufacturer, he's got one machine. So it's not like he's printing some of this, like that. He'll get one big order, he'll finish that, then he'll go on to another order, he'll do that. So these are printed in large batches. Now, the problem is that the labeling laws keep changing. Okay, so some change happens, you have to change the font or some information required, which is fine. And no objection to that. The problem is that randomly they used to be announced.
And so the batch which is already there.
You just printed a batch, it's gone. It's gone the next day because some rule was changed suddenly somewhere. And so and then of course, if there was things have gone into the supply chain, you have to then go into the supply chain and drag it out. Otherwise, another inspector will turn up and do something. So we made a very simple change in December. FSSAI, the food security guys, they put out a circular saying that all changes in labeling laws will be announced every year only once on the 1st of July. Sorted, right? Everybody in the labeling business knows on the 1st of July, I will find out what the new labeling things are. I'll keep my symptoms printing light on the few weeks. I'll go on a holiday, maybe it's June, so go on a nice holiday to Mussoorie or wherever you want to go. And then you come back, you get the new laws and you do your printing. Dramatically changes an entire and very large MSME sector.
So that's a great effort, this one thing you're talking about. But if you were to put a percentage to it in terms of the process reforms, and let's just take just one sector, the MSMEs. I'm sure if we start talking about process reforms, you would have barely scratched the surface.
No, as I said, process reforms, this is not an ongoing thing. There is no end to doing process reforms. Even 100 years from now, we'll be doing some other process.
Some other tinkering that will be needed, yeah.
So my point is not about the specific examples I gave. I gave them only as examples to open people's mind to what I am talking about.
Right.
But the point is that this has to be done as almost like a routine thing that the government, the bureaucracy should do as a matter of routine. This has to become taught in administrative institutions. This has to be something that every ministry has to do, a sort of spring cleaning, just like you clean up the building or clean up our regulations. And so this has to be done as a matter of routine. So deregulation is not a one-time, we deregulated it once and now we all go home.
That's what happened in 1991.
No. 1991 Yes, there was one big bunch of. But in fact, the 1991 reforms have continued to this day. In fact, these regulations that I am talking about.
Yes, but there are gaps in between. There, you had 1991, and then for several years, nothing happened.
No. So that's exactly the point I'm making. This has now got to be a natural part of what we do.
True.
We've got to continuously re-look at our processes, look at the efficiency of it. Maybe we did a great reform, it improved dramatically, but then times change, and the guys we are competing with have moved on. We can't say, oh no, they're the very good. No, now the game is a different one. What used to take, we went from 7 days to 1 day, great, but now every country in the world is doing in 3 hours. Well, we have to do it in 3 hours or less.
The 10 trillion trajectory. How soon do you see it happening, given the current slowdown that we are facing? We are a very noisy and messy democracy. You might do something at the central level, but then again, it gets stuck at the state level, because if you're talking reforms, if you're talking, cleaning up process reforms, it has to, the trickle-down effect, if we just do it at the central level, will take a long time to reach the states. But the states also have to, because MSMEs and a lot of these laws affect, are orchestrated by the states, are led by the states, is, the center. Given all these challenges that we live in, we're a federal structure, a noisy democracy, lots of political compulsions, which this government, fortunately, has not bowed down to these political compulsions and taken very strong stands for reforms, except a couple of times when they've had to backtrack. But largely, how do you see the 10 trillion?
See, in the end, we are a democracy. And we will get the policies that ultimately we, the people of India, will ask for. Technocrats can suggest, political leaders can, advocate reforms. But in the end, we will only do those reforms that we as a people want. So, in the end, it comes down to we, the people of India. Unless we, the people of India, demand reforms, and we don't aspire to have that $10 trillion economy, we are not becoming a $10 trillion economy. If our thinking is we want reveries, then we will get reveries. No point in blaming some political class, irrespective of the party. The point of the matter is, we as a people have to have that aspiration. And one of the things we have tried to do through this budget is to open our middle class at least to this aspiration. That look, go out there, take risks. Let's build the infrastructure. And we have done this in other areas. Build world-class infrastructure. Show people that we can build that kind of infrastructure. Then aspirations will, develop accordingly.
Going forward in this road to 10 trillion, what are the process reforms aside? You're saying that's a continuous process. What are the big ticket reforms that are definitely needed if we have to become that economy by 2030, 2032, whenever?
So, these reforms we are anyway doing.
Yeah.
If you ask me the 3 major areas of reform that we have to do, they would be the following. They're not necessarily in the central government's ambit, but as I said, since I'm talking as a citizen of India rather than a central government official now, let me say that we have to be serious about 3 things. The first and single most important area of reform that we need is a reform of our legal system. We cannot be a cutting edge economy without a simple enforcement of contract, delivery of justice system that is in the state it is. It takes years to even do routine cases. So if I had to invest in one thing to clean it up and get it really growing, it would be the legal system. And I've said this multiple times. A large number of process reforms can also be done in the legal system. It's just not about putting better.
You face a lot of opposition.
I've talked about it. I talked about why the judiciary, for example, higher judiciary should give up its vacations, for example, and keep judges can go on holidays as they wish, just like all of us do. Why does the entire judicial system have to be shut down for vacations? Yeah. When I said that, a lot of people opposed it, but I think at some point in time, we, the people of India, have got to stand up to this and say that, look, the judicial services is a service They're public servants like everybody else, and they should keep public the same hours like everybody else. I'm not saying that judges don't need vacations or whatever it is, but they can take it just like the rest of us do. I don't see why the court system has to shut down for long periods of time in the summer, in winter, in the Sahara, and so on. So that is just one reform. I mean, there are multiple things we need to do with the legal system to speed it up. And so legal reform, big area of reform. The second big area of reform, I would say, is municipal governance. One of the things that really strikes me as I travel through the interiors of India is how much absolute trash lying around everywhere. Yeah. Now, I used to think when I was younger that our cities are dirty because we are poor. Okay, we are a poverty-stricken country.
Not true. We don't have a civic sense.
Yes. So now, I'm now in my 50s. The cities have not cleaned up. We have become much richer. There's no comparison in our per capita incomes what was there when I was growing up and what they have today. Delhi is actually a dirtier city today than it was in 1990. Maybe except the Lutyens area, everything else is actually dirtier. We have better buildings. We have the metro system. We have many other things that have improved. But it is a dirtier city. So the basic, this is not high technology. Our river systems, Yamuna, full of effluents and pollution. Our air quality is actually worse today than it was. And if you compare to that, look at people who are roughly at the same level of per capita income. Go to Ho Chi Minh City, go to Hanoi, Vietnam, right? This is a country that is
Also a developing
country with a roughly the same per capita income. So, much cleaner. You can walk around the place. So municipal governance is a big area that we need to do. And when I say municipal governance, it's not only about our cities, it's also about our villages. Go to our villages. Go to Haryana villages, for example, right? Haryana is not a poor state by any standard. Global standards, many Haryana villages have decent per capita income, but they are, and by the way, they are lovely cars, they have beautiful houses. But if you look at the roads, the drainage, the amazing amount of cow dung lying around, it needs to be cleaned up. This is not rocket science. It requires a municipal effort that we as a country need to do to clean the country up. So this is a second big reform. The third big reform that we need to do is administrative reform. We need to map the government. This needs to be done in every government in the world. DOGE is doing it in its own way. But in India, I would say first thing we need to do is to simply map out the scope of and deployment of the central government, for example. And at state level, they can do it at the state level as well. And figure out what departments are there. Okay, everybody knows the big ministries and maybe even the big departments. But within each one of them, there are subordinate offices, attached offices, autonomous bodies, think tanks. You'll get some sense of them in the budget papers if you go through them, and you'll see each ministry has got dozens of them, and that also doesn't tell you the full sense of it. There are many of these have multiple subdivisions, offsets, and all kinds of things, and some of them may have been of some use when they were set up, but many of them need to be just simply shut down, and we need to have a huge cleanup of the system that I think we need to do.
Are you saying India needs an official DOGE department?
I don't know if we need a department because I get uncomfortable creating another department. Since I'm advocating cleaning it up, create another department of government efficiency sounds almost oxymoronic. But you get what I
hear you.
What I'm getting at.
I hear you. I think on that note, because that seems like a Herculean. I'm already feeling tired just listening to the number of things that need to be done on the.
All of these can be done. They will be done in our lifetime.
All right. On that note, thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Sanyal. Thank you, viewers, for watching this. We will come back to you with more. Stay tuned to Times of India.